It's an ivory! What the hell is it? Wait a minute!
The sheer absurdity and unpredictability of the wrestling industry attracts the audience to this unreal, kayfabe world. Larger-than-life personas and intriguing storytelling mean the audiences keep coming back for more, sometimes for their lives. However, what transpires on screen is sometimes a complete antithesis of things that are going on in the background. And in this case, people were oblivious to reportedly some of the most heartbreaking and dastardly details that have ever rocked the world of wrestling. We're talking about the fabulous Moolah and the multiple allegations that have been labeled on her for years. Was she really a pioneer of women's wrestling? Or was it all a cover under which Moolah tortured budding women wrestlers for decades? Our suggestion? See for yourself. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you. For us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. The origins. More than a century ago, in 1923, Mary Lillian Ellison was born to Henry Lee and Susan Atkinson Ellisor in South Carolina. She lost her mother at a very young age, and it's said that she was deeply troubled by the untimely loss. Ellison was introduced to the world of wrestling by her father in an effort to make her feel better, taking her to many wrestling events. Little did he know that she would one day forge a long, rewarding career out of the grappling business. Young Ellison was smitten by the women's champion at the time, Mildred Burke. Although women were merely used as props in the wrestling world back then, the protagonist of her story had convinced herself to make it her profession. Ellison forayed into the squared circle with promoter Billy Wolf, who was known to force his talents into having sexual encounters with himself or fellow promoters in lieu of better career prospects. But Ellison thwarted his advances. She then associated herself with another wrestling mogul, Jack Pfeiffer, who first created the moniker Slave Girl Moolah. The South Carolina native then had stints as a valet with Buddy Rogers and Elephant Boy before joining Vince McMahon Sr.'s Capital Wrestling Corporation, a move that would change the landscape of women's wrestling forever. Monopoly over women's wrestling for decades. Soon after joining CWC, Moolah won the World Women's Wrestling Championship in a battle royale. She adopted the moniker of the Fabulous Moolah after this monumental win. What's fascinating is that her reign at the top of the women's division lasted an astonishing 28 years. It's fair to say that this extraordinary record would remain unharmed for time immemorial, but putting a grappler at the top of the pedestal for so long, was it the right move on the part of McMahon Sr.? Well, sure. To put the women's title on the most recognizable face at the time made complete business sense. But looking back at the alleged events that transpired during Moolah's reign of terror would suggest otherwise. It all began when the controversial performer opened a wrestling school in partnership with her second husband, Buddy Lee, in the latter half of the 1950s. Unbeknownst to many, Moolah was about to have a monopoly over women's wrestling, not for a few years, but for decades. The dark secrets of her wrestling school. Although the fabulous one had trained and developed women performers before as well, she started doing so under the banner of Girl Wrestling Enterprise along with Lee, wherein Moolah would not only tutor aspiring wrestlers, but also book them as part of the women's exclusive promotion. She's said to have charged a fee of $500 per month, a hefty fee in the 1960s. Many of her prodigies claimed later that the 8-time women's champion largely delegated the training work to the senior members of her wrestling school, instead of herself imparting lessons. Hundreds of budding women wrestlers flocked to Moolah's wrestling school to, one day make a name for themselves in the wrestling world. And it wasn't easy at all. In addition to the unusually expensive training fee, they had to do away with $300 per month as rent for staying in their designated quarters in Moolah's South Carolina compound. Just when you think that things couldn't get any murkier for those young wrestling hopes, you'd be shocked to know that the WWE Hall of Famer reportedly skimmed 25 to 30% off of any amount these performers hailing from Moolahs Dungeon would earn from wrestling. On top of this uberly harsh environment, the veteran grappler imposed a host of restrictions on her mentees, which reportedly included looking and behaving in a certain manner, unusual dating guidelines, and as many have claimed, they were subjected to pimping. Pimping allegation. For a long time, the fabulous Moolah was seen as a shining light that paved the way for women's wrestling to take center stage one day. However, after she died in 2007, people who had rubbed shoulders with her started coming out, describing the real face of Moolah. Among them was a yesteryear women's wrestling legend, Penny Banner, who ripped into those celebrating the controversial grappler's achievements after her demise. Banner claimed that Moolah offered her prodigies to wrestling promoters for sexual favor, not only for themselves, but also for the male wrestlers competing in their territory. The notable performer of the 1950s also alleged that Moolah would subject her underage trainees to be photographed inappropriately by older men, something that would be considered pornographic in nature in the current time. Another former prodigy, Luna Vachon, supported these claims and disclosed that Moolah had sent her to be photographed by a man when she was just 16 years old. Many known names in the wrestling world, like Jerry Lawler and Bruce Pritchard, have refuted claims of Moolah ever subjecting her trainees to pimping. The sad story of one sweet Georgia Brown might change your mind. The heart-wrenching story of Sweet Georgia Brown. Sweet Georgia Brown, the first ever wrestling women's champion of African-American descent, was a promising wrestler who also learned the nuances of grappling from the fabulous Moolah. It was not a big surprise, as the tainted performer had a stranglehold on women's wrestling back in the day. However, a 2006 article by the Columbia Free Times newspaper brought many horrific details to light. The piece, which quoted Brown's daughter, Barbara Harsey, alleged that the former grappler was subjected to continuous mental and physical torture by both Moolah and her former husband, Buddy Lee. Additionally, the article noted that Brown would always return pregnant from the road. Reportedly, Lee was behind this heinous act. The heart-wrenching sequence of events did not stop there, as Brown's daughter also claimed that Moolah and her husband deliberately made her late mother a drug addict to further their hold on the wrestler. Wendy Richter, a prodigy of Moolah who became bigger than her mentor. The fabulous Moolah reigned supreme in the women's wrestling circle for almost 3 decades as the women's wrestling champion, that is, until 1983. Enter Wendy Richter, another product of Moolah's endless crop of women wrestlers who emerged as a legitimate contender for her master's throne. Change was afoot in the wrestling world in the 80s as McMahon's senior son, Vince McMahon Jr., brought the WWF promotion from his father in 1982 to embark on global dominance in the wrestling world. As the times were changing, so was the plight of women wrestlers in the industry. Now, Richter, an eccentric grap, immediately caught McMahon's eyes as he saw the performer's potential equivalent to a female version of Hulk Hogan. Hence, when the Stanford-based promotion pursued a celebrity rivalry between music sensation Cyndi Lauper and wrestling manager Lou Albano, it chose Richter to represent Lauper. At the same time, the veteran Moolah was tasked to represent Albano. The match was to take place in the then upcoming MTV's The Brawl to end it all. And to add to the stakes, the Fabulous One's women's title, which she had held for almost 28 years, was on the line too. During the build-up to the high-profile encounter, Richter accompanied Lauper to many popular talk shows, garnering widespread attention. When the consequential night arrived, Moolah lost her beloved title to her apprentice to a raucous reception from the crowd. After this historic win, Richter convinced McMahon to route her paychecks directly instead of going through Moolah, a practice that was the norm for women wrestlers till then. It seemed WWF had found its new trailblazer who would take the mantle of female wrestling going into the future. However, in 1985, McMahon saw Richter's reluctance to ink a new deal while holding the women's title as a potential threat. So, what did the contriving boss do? As usual, he devised a sinister plan, and unsurprisingly, Moolah was at the forefront of his scheme.
Clothesline by Wendy.
The original screwjob. The mention of the word screwjob immediately harks back wrestling fans to the infamous Montreal screwjob that saw Shawn Michaels ditch Bret Hart in front of his home crowd. Of course, the whole charade was orchestrated by Vince McMahon. However, some of you might not know that the tough boss had masterminded the exact same script 12 years ago. Wendy Richter, the promising women's champion, was prepared to dig in regarding her contract negotiation, making McMahon increasingly worried. He turned to Moolah for an assist, and the stalwart pounced at the chance to disgrace her former trainee. The scene was set at the iconic Madison Square Gardens as Richter was poised to defend her title against a masked opponent, the Spider Lady. The two women engaged in a brief skirmish as the crowd settled in, but to everyone's surprise, the match ended in a heartbeat. The masked adversary put Richter in a pinfall attempt, and the champion kicked out at the count of 1, but the referee made a free count, handing the title win to the challenger. The Spider Lady removed her mask to reveal it was the fabulous Moolah behind the mask, confirming the crowd's apprehensions who were chanting her name. This made Richter realize that her former mentor and McMahon had combined to screw her royally, in the process giving the WWF one of its most dubious moments. The beginning of the end of Moolah's dominance over women's wrestling. For better or for worse, Moolah had a stronghold over women's wrestling for many decades. She was everywhere, from manipulating her prodigies' lifestyle to controlling their paychecks. Coincidentally, the wily wrestler held the women's championship all these years while dominating the scene. Although she reclaimed her title from Wendy Richter in 1985, the unassailability aspect of her 28-year run at the top of women's wrestling was no more. Moreover, aspiring female wrestlers realized that the path to making it big in the wrestling industry didn't necessarily pass through Moolah's tutelage. This forced the experienced grappler away from the center stage of WWF to start her promotion, the Ladies International Wrestling Association. Moolah did spark a comeback at the WWE at the heights of the acclaimed Attitude Era in 1999 at the ripe old age of 76. She even managed to win the women's title one more time, but was largely reduced to comedic and often cringe segments with fellow veteran Mae Young, instead of taking up any prominent role on TV. WWE's efforts to honor Moolah blasted from all quarters. WWE has never shied away from honoring the fabulous Moolah, as she was the first ever female entrant to its Hall of Fame in 1995. At this time, wrestling fans were in awe of the incredible contributions made by Moolah to women's wrestling. It was in the 2000s that her alleged misdeeds started coming to light, making the fans aware of the condition of female grappling in yesteryear. And, you know, with Moolah at the forefront of it all. Hence, when WWE decided to name a 20-women battle royale at WrestleMania as the Fabulous Moolah Battle Royale, the global wrestling phenomenon faced severe backlash from the masses, so much so that the sponsors had to get involved. As a result, the company was forced to double down on its initial plan.
Individual, but a very feminine type female, and
marvelous verdict. Irrespective of how things may appear inclined in a particular direction, any story has two sides. Although many prominent figures in the wrestling industry have accused the fabulous Moolah of some of the most obnoxious acts ever seen in the professional wrestling domain, some have vehemently defended the veteran performer. There may not be a definitive answer as to whether Moolah was guilty or not, but one thing is for sure, there's no smoke without fire. And that's the end of our video. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to our channel. If you haven't already, have a good one, be safe. Thanks everyone.